The world is in peril. This year, we have witnessed major catastrophic weather events. From the floods in Pakistan that inundated almost one-third of the country to prolonged heat waves in Europe, all of this indicates that urgent actions are required to overturn the impact of climate crisis. And this is human-made. In December, the United Nations is holding its Biodiversity Summit. This will be held in Canada's Montreal. The summit is taking place nearly 3 years later than originally planned due to repeated delays caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, leaving the world without targets to halt the extinction. So in Montreal, delegates from scores of countries will attend the UN summit to agree on a deal to protect biodiversity. But what exactly do we mean by the term biodiversity? It refers to the different living beings on our planet and how they fit together in a delicate web of life to maintain balance and support life. So the new global biodiversity framework is seen as the nature equivalent of the Paris Climate Agreement, where countries agree to limit the global temperature rise. Let's take a look now at some of the key ambitions as far as the Biodiversity Summit is concerned. In the next 8 years, around 30% of our planet's land and sea should be converted into protected areas. By the year 2050, a shared vision of living in harmony with nature needs to be fulfilled. Moreover, during the summit, they will also try to remove billions of dollars of environmentally damaging government subsidies and restore the degraded system. The Biodiversity Summit comes in the wake of the UN Climate Conference, which took place in Egypt, where a step in the right direction was taken when scores of countries agreed to establish the Loss and Damage Fund that will help pay for the damage which an overheating planet is inflicting on the poor countries. Although few of the countries were left disappointed over the failure to push further on cutting emissions, since no progress was made on making additional efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And with me on the broadcast this minute is Svein Tvedal from Norway. He is the former Assistant Executive Director, UN Environment Programme, and the Director, Klima 2020. Thanks very much for being here, Svein. Will the decisions taken during this Biodiversity Summit be binding on the countries, and what are the expectations from this summit?
Well, as you said, the expectations is to protect nature and to protect ecosystems. And like the climate convention you talked about, the pledges is voluntary. But what countries have to do is to report what measures they take to agree upon the overall goals of the convention, which is to protect nature and ecosystems. And the overall goal, actually, and that is needed according to science to have a vital planet in the future, is to protect 30% of land and sea. And you mentioned the climate summit, and this summit on biodiversity is as important, but they say now that the summit that comes up now in Montreal, it could be a success like they say the Paris Agreement was, if you have a real good agreement, or it could be a failure like Copenhagen, that was a disaster. So it is extremely important now to follow what is happening in Montreal. Just to tell you, the problems is that every year we are putting an area like Great Britain under asphalt or concrete, and 1 million species are threatened by extinction. And as you have in climate, also here we have tipping points where it won't work. And the climate and the biodiversity is extremely interconnected. Let me take an example. In the Amazon, if the temperature is increasing by 3%, 3 degrees, as might happen now, we can see that the whole Amazon will collapse and go into and all the rainforest will disappear. But if the rainforest disappear and if the ecosystems is not working, the CO2 emissions will go up. Without a robust nature, we are not able to solve the climate problem. So it is very important what is taking place now, both in Sharm el-Sheikh and in Montreal in a couple of weeks.
Right. The UN Climate Summit just concluded in Egypt. Now, this biodiversity summit has, in a way, been drawing parallels to that climate summit that was held. So if we just take a step back and look at how the climate change summit and all the discussions involving climate change so far have yielded a series of promises, commitments, but the gap when it comes to translating that into action is way too huge. So does that not lead to a sense of pessimism when it comes to these climate discussions, and how would you respond to that?
Well, yes, that is correct. And you mentioned earlier that and that the only good thing with the meeting now in Sharm el-Sheikh was this loss and damage fund. But be aware, there is nothing in the fund. So these discussions will proceed. But it came on the agenda. But I think the only states that should be satisfied from Sharm el-Sheikh is the petro states. There was a lot of representatives there for oil and gas industry, and it was possible for them to put a stop on having anything about oil and gas in the declaration. So what will happen now is that emissions will continue to rise and temperature will continue to rise. And according to the UN, we go into a kind of climate absolute disaster. And that on its side, of course, then will put pressure on the nature and the ecosystem. So we are in a more and more difficult situation, both when it comes to climate and when it comes to the nature. But of course, we must not give up. Every degree, tenths of degree, we can stop the warming is extremely important. And all nature we can protect and for the future is extremely important. So we have to fight for both these issues that is very closely connected.
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment, Sven. Thanks very much for being here on the broadcast. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.